Hi, I'm Zach Bleicher, Executive Director of Edgar Miller Legacy, and welcome to our Fall Smash Week 2021. Our Fall Smash Week is our annual opportunity for Edgar Miller Legacy to celebrate and present on all the work that we've accomplished over the past year. We're here at the Floating World Gallery, home to our temporary exhibition, The Timeless Modern, where we're opening doors to celebrate and preserve the work and life of the great Chicago artist Edgar Miller, whose work still resonates with us today and continues to inspire future generations. Edgar Miller Legacy is celebrating its 7th anniversary this year, and we're so grateful to everyone who's been supporting the organization in its initial formative years. This year's Fall Smash Week takes us into the mind of Edgar Miller's graphic design through this temporary exhibition, The Timeless Modern. We'll also be presenting highlights from our programs during Fall Smash Week, including talks from Alexander Vertikoff, photographer for Edgar Miller and the Handmade Home, as well as an artist talk between Edgar Miller-inspired artists Sharon Bladholm and Hannah Dykstra. We're also going to be visited by a special guest, Jeffrey Bayer of WTTW, to say a few words about how he's been inspired by Edgar Miller's work. And join us as we honor 2 very special community members of Edgar Miller Legacy who will be the recipients of our annual awards. This year's Champion Award recipient, Lisa Yoon Lee, Executive Director of the National Public Housing Museum, as well as this year's Creative Spirit Award recipient, writer, photographer, and cultural historian, Lee Bay. And thanks to your support, Edgar Miller's work is finding whole new audiences worldwide. One of our most important accomplishments of this past year was the launching of our virtual tour of the Glasner Studio, which has reached tens of thousands of people worldwide and takes people into Edgar Miller's masterwork of art, design, and architecture. Now, let's take a brief tour with curator and art historian Maren Sullivan, who will help to explain the art, graphic design, and story on display at this year's Timeless Modern exhibition.
Hi, I'm Maren Sullivan. I'm a Chicago-based curator and art historian, and we are standing in the midst of some of Edgar Miller's work. Edgar Miller was a tremendously prolific and diverse artist who established his career in Chicago in the 20s and 30s, and a lot of the pieces in the gallery and included in this exhibition are from that time period. He's somebody who, even in that particular moment when he's making the pieces that we see on view here, is somebody who's pulling references both from the contemporary world in which he's living, so it very much feels of the 30s or 20s or whatever decade he's working in, but he's drawing from so many other sources and inspirations and influences. So I think something that gets remarked upon a lot in Miller's work, and I completely agree with this assessment, is how it both feels timeless and modern, right? That there's ways in which you look at his style and his approach to making, and it feels medieval or Byzantine, and yet absolutely something that was fresh and avant-garde and experimental in the early 20th century. So I think one of the reasons that his work still feels so relevant and fresh, even in 2021, is the way in which he's mixing all of these influences. And I think that kind of borrowing and kind of complexity of influence is also something that contemporary practitioners do today. One of the things that I find really interesting about this particular exhibition of his graphic work is that it really shows how interconnected Edgar Miller was to Chicago and the history of Chicago. One of the ways that we approach pieces like the original map for Brookfield Zoo is to think about how he was working for companies, corporations, government entities, nonprofit organizations, and collaborating with just a broad range of other designers, architects, artists throughout the city and its suburbs during the 20s and 30s. And I think really to understand the history and to be introduced to the history of Edgar Miller's work is also to be introduced to the history of Chicago during that time period. Through his work, we really get an insight into how Chicago-based companies like Marshall Field's or the Brookfield Zoo were really thinking about how art could help with their branding and their messaging. And for Miller, he was not somebody who thought of art and design as separate practices. He was really enthusiastic about just making and creating strong visuals that would help tell the story of his clients, but also of his own perspectives on the world. And one of the other things that I find really striking about this exhibition is how even though Miller's working for different clients and for different kind of spec projects, his style also carries through. Regardless of what the medium was or the format or the kind of intention or mission behind that particular project was, you still get a sense that this is definitely an Edgar Miller, and his personality and artistic viewpoint really shines through.
This year's Fall Smash Week allowed us to showcase the work of some of Edgar Miller Legacy's extraordinarily talented community members. With visiting architectural photographer Alexander Verdikoff, we were not only able to highlight his work, but also to revisit the project that put him on the Edgar Miller map, the 2009 monograph, Edgar Miller and the Handmade Home. Alex Verdikoff has been capturing award-winning photography for over 40 years. Let's take a moment and listen to some of Alex's presentation and view some of his incredibly inspiring photographs.
As some of you might know, I've been a photographer for almost 50 years. I came to this book via an old friend of mine, Mike Williams, with whom I've done quite a few projects for American Bungalow magazine and a few books. I was looking back through the emails, and I think it was back in January of 2008, and Mike said that he had a little project that I might be interested in that would take 3 or 4 days of shooting, and it was hard to describe as far as style. That was just a little bit of everything, which I love. So things happened. We were supposed to be doing about 150 to 200 images, but all said and done, we ended up shooting about 1,200. Once we started, the project just kept expanding. We kept getting permission to go to new places, kept getting permission to come back, so it just kept going and going and going. We're going to start over at Burton Place. Here's the entrance to the Carl Street Studios. These incorporated elements and textural details. These slate pieces stacked across horizontally here. That's what I love about Edgar. He has no reverence for the technical use for the item in question. So he's got a groovy tile. Who cares? I'm going to flip it and show what's on the back. It's all about the end result, and that's fantastic. And Edgar is also working at the tail end of the arts and crafts movement, so the groovy tile had no value anyway, so why not? So once you get into the Burton Place courtyard, you go through this turn, and then you're into this little hallway, and you see this amazing sgraffito ceiling on stucco. It's kind of an urban thing, so you rarely ever walk in somewhere and look up. Usually it's a sign of a tourist, and you're usually looking down. But the design here really makes you look at all your surroundings throughout the outdoor and indoor spaces. Burton Place, which we shot pretty early on the project, really opened my eyes to Edgar's work. I just wish we had more time, even now, to explore absolutely every one of the units and really spend some time knocking around and getting even more photographs of it.
One of the most fascinating moments of our Fall Smash Week was an artist talk held in front of a live audience between two of the exhibiting contemporary artists and passionate Edgar Miller Legacy community members, graphic novelist and illustrator Hannah Dykstra, and multidisciplinary fine artist Sharon Bladholm. During the talk, the artists discussed their personal experiences and stories, responding to their time in the Edgar Miller designed built environments, where they both were first introduced to Miller's work. Sharon describes how she first met Edgar Miller himself in the late 1980s and came to be closely acquainted with the art scene surrounding him. And as one of Edgar Miller Legacy's collaborative artists, Hannah shares her own understanding of how inspiration passes down between artists through generations. Let's listen in on part of their conversation from Fall Smash Week 2021.
So I'm going to start with my questions, and I have a lot of things that I'm interested in hearing.
Me too.
So let's see. For one, I know we talked a little about this, but how did you meet Edgar Miller? And what were you doing in the city? Was this you knew in the city, and were you just a young artist looking for work and stuff?
Yeah. Well, I was a young artist just making my way. I met Edgar at that event in Old Town in 1986. Everybody, of course, was, trying to talk to Edgar, and, he was the star of the evening. I went to events, met Edgar, and one time Karen Flowers and I, that was really amazing. We brought Edgar and Paul over to my studio in what I call the plant room and set them up with some tea and cheesecake and just shot video, and they said some incredible philosophical stuff about art. I mean, I feel like I've been spreading the word about Edgar for, years, and now it's so great that there's an organization that's, officially doing it. But yeah.
I sort of feel similarly, where it's just whoa, why didn't I know about this in my art history class? Why am I just finding this out now?
Right.
But yes, right. I've been working at this place called Art on Sedgwick, which is an amazing organization that's trying to bring all the diverse sides of one community together with art. And I've just been teaching a lot of classes there. I've done stuff on Edgar Miller, and as part of one of the major collaborations, I got to go into the Glasner studio. And it was my first time. I'd just seen the book with Alexander Vertikoff's pictures, and I sort of glanced through the text, and I was just oh, that's cool. But then when you go there, it's so different. And I had a vision where it could be really useful to get this story out to more people. And that's, since what I do is historical graphic novels, I thought in general, having a story of this place would make a lot more people interested. So that was one of my main reasons.
Okay.
And that's sort of how I came up with the idea of the graphic novel, just through my own personal practice and seeing how just visually amazing everything was, and how maybe this could be brought to a wider audience.
How much did the built environment affect you, this incredible space while you were working?
I found it interesting. Of course, it's just visually spectacular. You walk in and you're just oh, wow, I wonder what it would be like to stay here for a while. It's like walking into an artwork. And so, actually, when I really thought about, man, this is kind of elevating your people's personal life to maybe where it should be. I think everybody, the art that they do is the art of their own lives. The space where you live is where things happen, and sort of elevating the place where life happens through a beautiful set of artwork.
And I haven't had the luxury like you did of doing a residency and spending that much time. But definitely from the first time I kind of started it out with that from when I was 19 and walked into the one on Cleveland, it was just totally blown away. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that before, and it was just like a revelation, and continues to be over the. I mean, I had never been in Glassner until I went to some of the events, even though I knew a lot. I'd been in the Carl Street studios, but I mean that was incredible. But yeah, I was very moved that first time I was in there. I mean, I really felt like I felt the connection to him very strongly when being in that space.
Oh yeah, definitely. Just looking at pictures, I can walk to the place and feel what it's like to be there.
Yeah.
And as I realized I had to make all of these pictures, I realized sometimes inspiration comes when you just sit there and you start drawing. You don't always have to be in a beautiful space to make something. Sometimes you just got to be there and do the work, and the inspiration comes. I think that's it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was lovely. It was lovely talking to you informally the other day, and this as well. So thanks for listening, and yeah, we look.
As a special guest of the Fall Smash 2021 celebration, WTTW host and producer Jeffrey Bayer shared with us his personal reflections on the incredible work of Edgar Miller and the handmade homes of Chicago. Let's hear from him now.
In more than 30 years of sharing hidden gems in Chicago with public television audiences on WTTW and PBS, this might be my very favorite hidden gem. This is the Glassner Studio. People call it a handmade home, conceived and executed by Edgar Miller. Walking through this house, you almost feel like you're inside the mind of Edgar Miller, an artist bursting at the seams with creativity and craft, because you experience Miller's amazing artistry in three dimensions. You're immersed in it. It's better than virtual reality. It's real reality. You experience it with all of your senses, the sound of the creaking wooden floor as you walk across it, the smell of the wood, the tactile sensation of things you might touch, but don't touch too much. We want to preserve it for future generations. This was designed as a place for artists to live and work communally. And so Miller literally surrounded them with inspiration. They couldn't escape it. You also get a very real feeling of being transported back in time when you're here to an almost forgotten era when what we now call the Near North Side and Old Town. In the early 1900s, the area was really kind of a rundown bohemian district. The southern end of this enclave was called Tower Town, a few blocks away from here, because it was centered around the old Chicago Water Tower. Now, maybe the most famous hotbed of radical thinking in Tower Town was the Dill Pickle Club, spelled with one L, D-I-L, the Dill Pickle Club, in a half basement entered from an alley. I wish I could have been there to experience it myself. It was a kind of a combination seedy bar, restaurant, cabaret, and art gallery, and Edgar Miller ran the printmaking workshop there. Now, I would imagine learning printmaking or anything else from Edgar Miller would be like a master class in craftsmanship, doing things by hand with old world tools and methods across a dizzying array of mediums. As Rich Cahan and Michael Williams wrote in their fabulous book, The Handmade Home, this is a quote, "Miller was a trained fine art painter, a master wood carver, one of the nation's foremost stained glass designers. He would sculpt in stone and plaster, draw portraits and murals. He was considered a pioneer in the use of graphic art in advertising. Miller's work referenced styles as diverse as medieval Gothicism, Mexican modernism, French expressionism, and American Art Deco. Miller often decried intellectual modern art, and believing instead that art should be made to connect with everyone without any explanation. So this stew of different techniques and influences somehow makes this house feel simultaneously, at least to me, medieval and also mid-20th century modern. I think the one word that sums up what you feel when you're in here is delight. And I think that that's exactly what Edgar Miller intended. Now, until a few years ago, I was only vaguely aware of Edgar Miller. And I wrongly assumed that this brilliant artist must have died frustrated that his art was not and would not be known. Actually, he was very well known in his own lifetime. His graphic design skills attracted big Chicago clients like Marshall Fields, Carson Perry Scott, Container Corporation of America, WGN. His decorative arts adorned prominent Chicago buildings. And he created celebrated murals for clients, including the Tavern Club, where he was a member, along with many top-tier Chicago architects, artists, writers, and others. His renown did fade a little bit later in his life, but just days before he died at age 93 in 1993, he attended a packed house presentation on his life and work at the Chicago Architecture Foundation, and he was able to see that his work was becoming better appreciated again by a new generation of Chicagoans. So it's really only in the years since his death that he seems to have been a bit forgotten. When I first toured this house, I thought to myself, how is this guy not world famous? And that's why I think the work of the Edgar Miller Legacy is so important. The world needs to know about Edgar Miller and to see his legacy as a living thing, continuing to inspire for generations to come.
For the past 3 years, Edgar Miller Legacy has recognized outstanding community members, both the champions of our mission and the creative spirits who are inspired by Edgar Miller's work. In 2021, we honored Lisa Yoon Lee, Executive Director of the National Public Housing Museum and longtime champion of Edgar Miller Legacy's mission, and author, photographer, and historian Lee Bay, for his career's achievement in highlighting underknown artists, designers, and creators from Chicago. Let's take a moment to hear a special message from Lisa Lee about what this award and her work means to her.
I am so thrilled and honored to be receiving an Edgar. As a cultural activist, I've been so lucky for my passions to intersect with the history of Edgar Miller and the vision and values of Edgar Miller Legacy. I first encountered Edgar Miller's work while I was the director of the Jane Addams Hull House Museum at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Edgar Miller's first residence in Chicago in 1917 was in a boarding room at the Hull House settlement, a fiercely political and feminist space. And after he left, he would frequently return to the studios and maintain deep friendships with many of the teachers and social activists there. I learned, for example, of Edgar Miller's friendship and mentorship of Jesus Torres, a Mexican immigrant who arrived in Chicago, undocumented and unemployed, as part of the wave of itinerant farmers and workers who came to the United States in the 1920s after the tumultuous years of the Mexican Revolution. Torres became a skilled ceramicist for the Hull House, which educated and employed pottery makers to provide meaningful jobs in the arts and help fund the work of the settlement. Torres became a lead assistant to Edgar Miller and helped to build and design Carl Street Studios in Old Town. His brilliant craftsmanship is visible in the studio's colorful ceramic tiles, pottery, and also those ornately carved red doors at Glesner Studio. Whenever I pass by these doors, they bring me so much joy, and it is one element in the built environment that in a deeply segregated city like Chicago links the West Side with the North Side. In a world where there are systems and forces that insist that we conform and stay within very narrow boundaries, Edgar Miller was a unique human being. He challenged mainstream ideals about art. Instead of boring Western monotonous definition of beauty, Miller explored the world and was inspired by indigenous art forms and aesthetics of immigrants he met and worked with, and helped to expand our ideas of what is beautiful, and by extension, what is true and what is just. I champion the work of Edgar Miller Legacy because in a world with so much unmaking and so much destruction, we must value the makers. And Edgar Miller was one of the most prolific and versatile makers and creators. Currently, as the director of the National Public Housing Museum, I am so lucky to be helping to restore and interpret Edgar Miller's stunning animal court at the museum's permanent site, the last remaining building of the Jane Addams homes. For those of you who may not be familiar, the National Public Housing Museum preserves, promotes, and propels the right of all people to a place where they can live and prosper, a place to call home. And very importantly, the museum also includes the enchanting Edgar Miller animal sculptures that once formed the focal point for the community, which are now being lovingly restored and after years in storage returned to their original location in the Alpha Wood Foundation Sculpture Garden at the National Public Housing Museum. Edgar Miller Legacy has been so important to our research to understand the effort it took to bring these WPA sculptures to this historic housing complex. Edgar Miller's insistence that playful public art is essential to safe, well-designed and livable housing and to creating community impacted generations of housing residents, and the museum is collecting the wonderful oral histories of people's memories of these artworks. Thank you again for this wonderful award. I am so deeply honored. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us for our virtual Fall Smash 2021 event. We encourage you to visit our website to explore in more detail the works featured in the Timeless Modern exhibition. There you can peruse the original artwork and photography of the contemporary artists, all of which is for sale, with the proceeds going to support the artists and EML's mission. And you can also view the full-length extended programs from our Fall Smash week. You can find it all at edgarmiller.org/timelessmodern. Before we say our farewells, we want to thank again all of our supporters for helping us to continue to explore and share the story of Edgar Miller with an ever-growing audience, both here in Chicago and beyond. Thank you once again to our Fall Smash 2021 host committee and all of our generous sponsors and donors. We look forward to seeing you this coming year and to continuing to keep Edgar Miller's inspiring legacy alive for many years to come. Thank you.